Hello and welcome, everybody, to another deep dive here on Books and Bytes. Today we're plunging into Victor Davis Hanson's remarkably thought-provoking book, Mexifornia, A State of Becoming.
Right, and this book, it offers a really deeply personal but also, broad look at California's demographic and cultural shifts, especially related to Mexican immigration. Hanson, he's actually a fifth-generation farmer there, Central Valley, and he mixes history, economics, and these really vivid personal stories from his own life. He uses them to explore this complex set of challenges and contradictions that are reshaping, not just California, but maybe the whole country.
That's right. Hanson takes us right to the heart of how California, which has often been, a kind of bellwether for the nation, is grappling with these huge changes. So our mission today is to unpack the core arguments, the observations he presents. We want to explore the shifting landscape of assimilation, the surprising realities for both immigrants and longtime residents, and maybe the different paths California might be heading down. It's really about getting to the core of what this idea of Mexifornia means for you and for America.
Absolutely. And Hanson really grounds this whole thing in a very personal story. It kind of sets the tone. He talks about meeting a Mexican farm laborer, Santiago Lara, way back in 1982.
Right, I remember that part.
Yeah, Lara just pulls into his family's orchard looking for work, temporary work. Hanson gives him a couple of days. But the fascinating thing, or maybe the troubling thing, is that Hanson notes, 2 decades later, he still sees Santiago Lara in the fields, still bent over from the work, still doesn't speak English.
Wow.
And despite having kids, grandkids, none have graduated high school.
No. That single encounter, it really seems to capture the central tension, doesn't it?
It does.
Hanson points out, when Lara left Mexico, his government basically wanted him gone, right, to avoid unrest over poverty. But then Americans welcomed him for cheap labor, and other groups, liberals, activists, saw him as maybe a future voter or just a number for their cause.
And the rest?
The rest, Hanson says, just didn't care much, as long as the economy was humming and he wasn't on welfare. But here's the kicker. Lara works incredibly hard, but he never really assimilated like Hanson maybe expected.
Yeah.
Hanson thought Santiago and his kids would become, like us, but now he's questioning that. He's suggesting California might be becoming more like the Laras, or maybe something else entirely, like a hybrid.
And that personal view quickly zooms out to the local level, to his hometown.
Selma, California.
Exactly. Selma. Once this sleepy little town, Hanson calls it, had diverse immigrants, but they assimilated. Now it's rapidly changed. It's become what he terms an edge city, massively influenced by Mexican immigration, a lot of it undocumented.
And the changes he describes are pretty stark.
Very stark. More Spanish than English on the street, schools becoming more segregated, lower academic achievement, and this weird mix of new material wealth popping up alongside, rising anger among some of the native-born folks.
Right.
What Hanson really zeroes in on is how this local shift connects to that bigger national worry about, secure borders and a unified citizenry, especially after 9/11. It raises these fundamental questions. Can a nation really hold on to common values if it has multiple kind of separate cultures living side by side?
Which leads right into what Hanson calls the unsolvable calculus of immigration. It's quite a term.
Is.
He argues there's this basic dilemma. Americans want the cheap labor, often for jobs they won't do, but they kind of wrongly assume immigrants will just naturally assimilate. At the same time, he claims many Mexican immigrants and their advocates tend to romanticize Mexico, the very place that, caused their hardship, while often criticizing the U.S.
It's a paradox.
Totally. And Hanson suggests this is a truth everyone kind of sees, but there's a paralysis of timidity and dishonesty stopping people from really facing it.
Yeah.
Why do you think he uses that word paralysis?
Well, Hanson's point seems to be that tackling the issue directly is just too risky, socially and politically.
How so?
If you question high immigration levels, you risk getting tagged as like an isolationist or nativist by the corporate right.
Okay.
But on the flip side, you might get called a racist or bigot by the multicultural left.
So you're stuck.
Pretty much. And adding to this paralysis is just the sheer confusion from all the conflicting statistics.
Oh, yeah, the numbers game.
Exactly. Liberal economists might say legal immigrants add billions in net revenue. Then skeptical statisticians counter that undocumented immigrants alone cost the U.S. tens of billions. Or that each undocumented person in California might cost, say, $50,000 more in services than they contribute over their lifetime.
Which implies, according to Hanson, that California households are effectively footing that bill.
Right. And the key insight here, the really interesting bit, is how these seemingly opposite groups, the corporate right and the multicultural left, kind of accidentally end up pushing for open borders.
Awesome.
For totally different, self-serving reasons, in his view.
Yeah, it's quite the strange bedfellow situation he describes. Statistics suggest undocumented labor might cut prices by less than 1%, but then employers warn of total economic collapse if borders tighten. It's just full of contradictions. Hanson highlights this alliance. The corporate right wanting the cheap, abundant labor for profits,
Right.
and the multicultural left expecting these same laborers to become future liberal voters.
Both pushing for open borders, but, as Hanson sees it, for their own gain.
And the results are almost ironic, aren't they? The tax-conscious right ends up with unassimilated people needing entitlement programs or ending up in prisons.
While the left sees the wages of their own domestic poor potentially undercut by cheaper foreign labor, it's kind of a lose-lose the way he frames it.
So connecting this back, Hanson asks this really crucial question. What makes Mexican immigration different from other big waves in American history?
Yeah, that's central to his argument. He points to a few key factors. The most obvious one, proximity.
The border being right there.
Exactly. He uses this really stark phrase, psychological guillotine.
Yeah, that jumped out at me too.
He argues that for past groups like, say, the Irish fleeing the famine or Jewish immigrants escaping pogroms, leaving home meant a clean, decisive break.
Right.
The distance itself acted like a guillotine cutting ties.
Right.
But for Mexican immigrants, he says the border is more like a trickle easily crossed. Could you expand on what he means by that trickle and how it affects things?
Absolutely. The crucial point here is how that closeness changes the whole assimilation game.
Yep.
That constant proximity, the ease of going back and forth, it allows for this continuous refreshment from Mexico. It kind of stops that psychological break, that decisive step into a new American identity.
It keeps the old ties strong.
Exactly. Past migrations, like Hanson says, they were often these explosive eruptions, think Irish-Jewish waves, but then they mostly stopped.
Right, a distinct wave.
But Mexican immigration, it's been this steady surf, as he puts it, since around 1970. The sheer nonstop volume makes assimilation really tough because, Hanson argues, for every Mexican-American who assimilates...
There are always several more coming in who haven't.
Right, constantly renewing the non-English-speaking population, making it hard for that psychological guillotine to ever really fall.
And another really critical piece in Hanson's analysis is the role of the Mexican government itself.
Ah, yes.
He describes Mexico City's attitude as kind of passive-aggressive, basically using mass immigration as a safety valve.
To avoid dealing with their own problems.
Pretty much. Avoids pressure for domestic reforms, keeps their own elites in power, plus you've got billions in remittances flowing back from workers in the U.S.
Propping up the Mexican economy.
Exactly, which reduces their incentive to change things at home. Hanson even throws in this controversial idea about an unspoken racial element,
Oh, so?
suggesting that it's the poorest, often indigenous, brownest populations leaving for the U.S., which, ironically, might suit a Mexican elite that's maybe unwilling to confront why lighter-skinned Mexicans often fare better within Mexico itself. It really raises questions about national self-interest, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And then there's that really provocative borders crossed us narrative he explored.
Oh, right. The irredentist idea.
Yeah, this idea that the American Southwest, having once been part of Mexico, should kind of rightfully belong to Mexico again, reclaiming lost territory.
Which Hanson calls a zany irredentist vision.
It's a surprising angle he explores, especially when you look at the polling he mentions.
The Zogby poll?
Yeah, showing like 58% of Mexican citizens believing the U.S. Southwest is rightfully theirs, which contrasts sharply with, 68% of Americans wanting military on the border.
It's a huge disconnect.
And Hanson ties this back to proximity again. He argues if Mexico were, say, across an ocean, this whole minority problem in California would probably just fade in a generation or two.
Because that constant influx and the historical grievance wouldn't have the same power without the border right there.
Mm-hmm. He also makes this really pointed argument that race itself is not the main barrier to assimilation, which goes against a lot of common narratives.
Right. That's a key part of his thesis. He points to other groups, Koreans, Punjabis, Japanese, Armenians groups, often categorized as people of color, many of whom, he notes, have darker skin than, say, African Americans, yet they've achieved significant economic success, sometimes even surpassing white majorities.
So what's his explanation?
His assertion is pretty blunt. Money has always eventually trumped race. in America. He argues the term person of color is often a kind of deliberate self-identification used strategically for what he calls racial opportunism, especially when a group feels isolated, poor, or dependent. But he insists that real economic integration, getting ahead financially, that's the true engine of assimilation, not race.
That's definitely a challenging viewpoint, and it leads us straight into his detailed look at the universe of the illegal alien. He paints a tough picture of the work they do, calls it Helilotage. For our listeners, can you unpack that term a bit? What kind of work is he talking about?
Sure. When Hanson uses Helilotage, he's drawing a parallel to ancient Sparta, basically.
Yeah.
He's talking about a system where a large subordinate class does the really hard, physical, often dangerous, low-skill jobs that most citizens won't touch.
Like what, specifically in California?
Farm work, obviously. Yeah. Landscaping, cleaning, construction, restaurant kitchens, that sort of thing. Hanson points out this striking contrast. Millions of American teenagers aren't even looking for summer jobs anymore, while immigrants are desperate for that same work. He argues pretty starkly that if undocumented immigrants vanished overnight, California's economy would grind to a halt. Food rotting in fields, hotels dirty, lawns overgrown.
And it's not just the work itself, is it? He describes a life lived on the margins, full of dangers for undocumented people.
Absolutely fraught with danger. Widespread exploitation by labor contractors, withholding wages, unfair deductions, that kind of thing.
Right.
Plus, alarmingly high crime rates against them. Robbery is common, often by Mexican gangs who know they carry cash and are scared to go to the police.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Hanson grimly notes that single, transient young men bring societies their crime and violence. He cites a Latino homicide rate 3 times higher than for non-Hispanic whites, with bodies sometimes just dumped in orchards or canals.
Yeah.
And then there are the health issues. Huge rates of STDs. TB rates 13 times higher among Hispanics than whites, often untreated or poorly treated. It's leading to a comeback of what he calls 19th century ailments you rarely see among citizens anymore.
Wow. Yet despite all these dangers, the sheer grind of it all, Hanson does acknowledge the initial dream, right? The dazzling hope immigrants bring.
Oh, absolutely. For someone earning maybe, $25 a week back in the Sierra Madre, making $10 an hour in California seems like a path to riches.
Right.
It fuels this dream of working hard, saving up, and going back to Mexico to live like an American with their savings.
But that's not usually what happens, according to him.
Mostly not, no. He observes that most don't actually return home for good. Those initial dazzling dreams tend to crash into what he calls the Great Awareness.
The Great Awareness.
Yeah, this deep disillusionment that sets in after a few years. He notices a pattern. Young men under 25, they're always smiling, energetic, but the guy's 40 and over, often grimacing, angry, looking way older than they are.
So it's not just a physical wearing down, it's psychological too.
A profound psychological impoverishment, yeah. They gain material things, maybe a used car, access to cheap goods, emergency room care if needed, but they experience this poverty of dwindling expectations. Being so close to American wealth, where things like clean water or a flushing toilet are just normal, it breeds resentment. Hanson used the ancient Greek term thonos, basically, envy. It's a misery, he argues, born from having way more than in Mexico, but still only a tiny fraction of what others around them in America have. They miss out on the freedom, the experiences, the good life natives take for granted.
And this feeling, this dwindling expectation, it gets worse with age, right? The aging worker's plight.
Yeah, compounded by age. Physical ability declines, but obligations, especially big families, often grow. Hanson makes this really stark statement. The greatest hazard to the illegal immigrant is a large family.
Why is that?
Well, while Mexican culture might value large families, American society values financial independence, individual growth. So large families become a huge economic burden here. This can lead to bitterness, reliance on welfare or assistance, and sometimes parents becoming a baleful influence, as he puts it. Their kids might see the struggle and turn to crime instead of labor.
Perpetuating a cycle.
Exactly. A cycle that then needs new, younger workers to come north to replace the ones who are worn out. It's a really bleak picture he paints.
A tragic cycle, truly. But Hanson also spots something else, almost revolutionary. This radical gender reversal happening in immigrant families. What's that about?
It's a really striking observation he makes. He notices that Mexican women often adapt and succeed faster in American society.
How so?
They get better jobs, often office or service work, learn English more quickly, and frequently become the main lifeline for their families. They actually start outperforming their husbands or male partners in many cases.
Which must be a huge shift from traditional roles.
a massive shift from traditional Mexican norms. Hanson suggests it reflects America's cultural bias toward skills like communication, presentation, office work, things women might access more easily over the pure physical labor many immigrant men are stuck in. It totally reshuffles family power dynamics.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Hansen also digs into the mind of the host. He shares his own frustrations, the everyday impacts he sees, giving this really visceral sense of the social costs.
Yeah, those personal anecdotes are powerful. He talks about damage to his vineyard from drunk, undocumented drivers, rampant trash dumping along roadsides, abandoned pets.
Right, the trailer full of garbage just dumped on his land.
Exactly. Property crime thefts from his farm, mailboxes broken into, even people shooting local wildlife.
And when he confronts trespassers, the reactions he gets are telling.
Very telling. Some seem genuinely annoyed that anyone in California still cares about the archaic notion of property rights. He even recounts a teenager telling him, hey, it's our land anyway, not yours.
Wow, that really captures a sense of disconnect.
And these personal stories lead him to critique what he calls an alternate universe of policy contradictions, things that just don't seem to make common sense.
Like what?
Well, for instance, the push for driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. He argues that creates a kind of two-tiered system of justice and citizenship.
They're the tuition issue.
Right. Undocumented aliens paying less tuition at state universities than American citizens from other states. He calls it a separate code of frontier jurisprudence. And it extends to birthright citizenship. A child born in the U.S. to undocumented parents is automatically a citizen, while an American executive's child born abroad might not be a citizen of that country.
And beyond these legal quirks, there's the strain on public services he describes.
Undeniable, he argues. Hospitals becoming almost exclusively Hispanics, often uninsured patients, public schools, social services just overflowing.
He also has some sharp words for the education system and what he calls the race industry. He thinks they've actually hurt assimilation.
Yeah, he argues that multiculturalism and education focus heavily on self-esteem have, maybe unintentionally, held people back, produced low graduation rates, fostered a sense of victimhood.
What exactly does he mean by the race industry, though? How does that fit in?
For Hanson, the race industry is this complex of activist groups, academics, some politicians, who, in his view, benefit from or actively perpetuate ethnic and racial division rather than pushing for integration.
Okay.
He specifically critiques things like Chicano studies, curricula, arguing they focus too much on racial solidarity and historical grievances instead of core academics like reading, writing, math.
He gives examples, right?
Yeah, like gang graffiti demanding help the helpless.
Okay.
Or that story of a thief basically saying, you can't eat all that fruit before it rots, so just give it to people who need it. For Hanson, that mindset is cultivated by this race industry. It justifies entitlement over self-reliance and assimilation.
And he contrasts this sharply with the past, suggesting there was a better way.
Precisely. He looks back at the, quote, unapologetically coarse efforts to insist on assimilation in schools before the 1970s.
Like what kind of efforts?
English immersion, teaching patriotism, civics, basically, forcing the Americanization process. He points to successful Mexican Americans from that earlier era, artists, athletes, professionals, who made it without this race industry.
So he thinks these modern groups are actually hindering progress.
That's his argument, that these militant groups and race manipulators push a partial truth about racism and exploitation, but they ignore their own role in holding people back. He's particularly critical of what he sees as hypocrisy among academics and politicians who might preach separatism but live very assimilated lives themselves. He calls them race hustlers, who actually fear true assimilation because it would undermine their own influence.
That's a really strong charge. Which brings us, finally, to the future. Based on all this, Hanson outlines several potential paths for California, for Mexifornia. What's the main one, the current trajectory, look like in his view?
If things just keep going as they are, Hanson paints a pretty grim picture. A true Mexifornia.
Which means?
A kind of hybrid civilization, maybe like a zona libre, a free zone. He points to specific towns in the Central Valley, Orange Cove, Mendota as examples. In this future, Spanish becomes basically co-equal with English. Poverty is widespread and persistent. Schools decline further. Crime rates climb. And there's very little real cultural mixing or integration.
He calls it an apartheid state.
Yeah, essentially, where you either have to lower standards for everyone to accommodate the lack of assimilation, or you end up with this permanent underclass of modern Helilotage doing the dirty work but never fully part of society. It's bleak, a real fragmentation.
That sounds like a serious warning. But he doesn't leave it there, right? He offers alternatives.
He does. Two stark alternatives to just letting things drift.
Okay, what's the first one?
Alternative one is assimilation without border changes. So you'd still allow immigration, maybe even at current levels, but you'd aggressively bring back that old proven assimilationist model from the 19th century, meaning you unequivocally expect immigrants to Americanize fully over time. English first, civics, the whole deal. In this scenario, he imagines Mexican ancestry eventually becoming like, say, Italian ancestry today. Cinco de Mayo becomes like Columbus Day. And those La Raza dinosaurs, his controversial term, they'd gradually fade away as their base, their clients, assimilate.
Okay, and the second alternative is much more drastic. Strict border control.
Much more drastic, yeah. This involves seriously fortifying the border, slashing legal immigration way down, maybe only 150,000 legal entries from Mexico a year, and immediately deporting undocumented immigrants.
What would be the impact of that?
Economically, you definitely see labor shortages, higher prices for things like food and services. But Hanson argues it would restore the rule of law and dramatically cut those social costs. He detailed the strain on schools, hospitals, welfare, controversies over things like tuition discounts or driver's licenses for the undocumented. They just vanish.
So both alternatives require a big conscious shift in policy.
A huge national decision, Hanson stresses, not just letting things happen.
Right. Hanson definitely doesn't pull any punches with his analysis or his proposed solutions. But there's this final twist, almost paradoxical, isn't there, where he talks about popular culture as a kind of accidental remedy.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, maybe cynical part of his conclusion.
How does he see pop culture fitting in?
He argues that while the formal institutions, schools, government might be failing at assimilation, there's this other force at work. Yeah. A moral power of a popular and global culture.
Meaning?
Mass consumerism. Cheap stuff from Walmart, fast food, Hollywood blockbusters, rap music, celebrity obsession, all that stuff.
And how does that help assimilation?
He suggests this culture cuts across old lines of race, class, language, because it appeals to these universal, maybe baser cravings, as he puts it. It creates this superficial veneer of sameness and fraternity. Everyone can wear the same Nikes, listen to the same pop songs, watch the same reality TV shows, regardless of background. It makes assimilation easier, but only on the surface.
So it kind of brings people together superficially.
Exactly.
But there's a downside.
A big one, in his view. This dumbing down, as he sees it, erodes not just traditional immigrant cultures, but also higher culture, serious art, literature. It risks creating a population that's increasingly illiterate, unskilled, and ignorant about its own country's institutions and history. So pop culture might unite us through shared tastes and, junk food and entertainment, but it could also leave us with a much shallower society, less able to handle the complexities of being a unified nation.
Wow. What a complex and, often contradictory picture Victor Davis Hanson paints of California's present and future. It's definitely clear the choices around immigration and assimilation have impacts far beyond just one state.
Indeed. Hanson really leaves us with this stark choice, doesn't he, for America? Are we going to consciously pick a path, demand assimilation, secure borders, or just keep drifting towards a potentially fragmented Mexifornia, maybe held together only by, the shallow glue of pop culture?
This deep dive certainly raises a huge question for you, our listener. In this world of constant global movement, cultures mixing everywhere, what actually defines a unified nation anymore? And what are we willing to do, or maybe sacrifice, to keep it unified, or to prevent losing it? What stands out to you about California's journey here? And what lessons might it hold for other communities facing similar changes around the world?
It's definitely a conversation that needs honesty, as Hanson suggests, without being afraid of labels and being willing to look at truths that, frankly, can be pretty uncomfortable.
And that is exactly what the deep dive aims to foster. Join us next time for another deep dive into the ideas shaping our world.